Thank you for joining us. Tonight we are talking about executive functioning, spotting it in your individuals and your loved ones, and supporting it. The subcategory here is we'll be talking about improving executive functioning for individuals on the autism spectrum. We'll start with some introductions. My name is Elise Wulff, and I am a senior manager in the Aspire program within the Lurie Center. Rachel?
Hi, I'm Rachel Goldin. I'm a clinical psychologist here at the Lurie Center. My role is completing neuropsychological evaluations, and I also do therapy.
Excellent. The first thing we're going to do here is model an executive functioning intervention, which is to give you a sense of the scope and sequence we'll be talking about. So, a little bit of this is preview, and a little bit of it is giving you a chance to create the files that we will then be putting information into. The first topic for tonight is an overview of executive functioning. This is a big buzzword. And I think for Rachel and I, it's really exciting that people are talking about this term. And with that idea of a buzzword, there can be a lot of misinformation. So, first, we want to empower you to understand what some of these terms do and don't mean. So, we'll be starting with an overview of some key vocabulary. Then we'll spend most of tonight thinking about strategies that you could apply to different developmental levels, different ages and stages, so that you could personalize these to the executive functioning needs of an individual in your life. And as I mentioned, we have saved time for Q&A at the end. So to jump right in, an overview of executive functioning. As you see on this graphic, executive functioning is listed next to the front of the brain. And that's intentional because where executive functioning happens is in this prefrontal cortex, which is in the front of your brain, but it's also in the outermost layer of your brain. And that will come back a little bit later when we talk about the relationship between stress and executive functioning. You also see three other core categories listed here, like our social communication, our sensory processing, our emotional regulation. We've also listed those here because they're really all managed, for lack of a better word, by our executive functions. So one way to think about the relationship between executive functioning and all the other things our brain and our nervous system do is almost a gas brake pedal relationship, where a lot of our basic drives, like emotions we have or senses we experience, there's the gas version of them, and then there's the modulation. And so a lot of what Rachel is going to talk to you about is how executive functioning supports us to manage that gas brake pedal relationship of a lot of our other core functions. Now, this graphic gives us a model for thinking about the different domains within executive functioning. One thing I do want to be clear about is this visual is from the psychoeducational approach to executive functioning. So my background is in special education. And one of the reasons Rachel and I thought we would start with this image is because it does break executive functioning down into somewhat observable buckets. For example, you could see activation, which would be someone starting something. You can, for the most part, see focus. You can see effort. Now, the emotions that are underneath the umbrella of executive functioning are not the existence of emotions, but our awareness and response to them in ourselves and other people. So sometimes people talk about emotions as related to executive functioning as emotional intelligence or emotional modulation. Then we have memory. Now, you can't necessarily see memory, but you can see the product of it, whether or not people can recall things and with what degree of accuracy. And then we have action. It's one way you could think about action is follow through or fluid problem solving. So I'm going to give one quick analogy and then turn it over to Rachel in a minute. When we think about specifically action or follow through, but a lot of these executive functions, one way that I think can be interesting just to conceptualize this is if you think about a neurotypical brain as a four-wheel drive car. When you go to start a task, you turn the key and the car starts, hopefully. As that task and the expectations keep coming at you, you can fluidly move while maintaining momentum forward. That's the mobility that this certain vehicle allows you. Some neurodivergence profiles, specifically autism, our executive functioning is a bit more like a train, where the tracks are laid and it takes a lot of energy to get the train moving. And then, okay, we can coast for a little bit, but oh no, oh, there's a problem with the tracks. Now we have to stop the train, deal with the problem, and then restart ourselves with almost the same amount of energy as we did in the first place. So this is, of course, an oversimplification, but I think it can help us to have a bit of an empathic experience for how that base neurodivergence can really be quite impactful in all phases of a task. Rachel.
So Elise just gave that broad overview of executive functioning. And now I want to talk a little bit more about some of the specific terms. And there's a lot of vocabulary that we hear associated with executive functioning. And it can be really, really confusing to understand what all these terms are, but not just what they are, but what does that mean functionally? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down 4 of the most common terms you're going to hear, some of the core features of executive functioning, and just talk about what they are and what some of the signs are, because that's going to help once we get to the strategies, understanding what strategies might be most effective. So next slide. So the first one I'm going to talk about is processing speed. Now, processing speed is a core piece of executive functioning, and why I'm starting with it is because processing speed, more than most others, can have a cascading effect on other areas of functioning. So processing speed is the time it takes our brain to take in, interpret, and respond to information it receives. Now, it determines how fast we can complete cognitive tasks, things like reading, problem solving, following directions. And it's important to understand that processing speed is separate from intelligence. Someone can have intact intelligence and also have deficits in their processing speed. Next slide. So some of the common signs that might emerge if there are weaknesses or vulnerabilities in processing speed are things like having difficulty following routines and directions, being slow to respond, and this can either be slow to respond in starting a task or slow to respond in answering a question, needing frequent repetition of instructions or things that they've heard, being easily overwhelmed when given a lot of information at once. Socially, processing speed deficits can emerge as things like having trouble keeping up in conversation or even missing social cues. And then one I think we see a lot is struggling to finish tasks in the allotted amount of time. Next slide. The next core piece that I'm going to talk about is working memory. And working memory, I think, is a confusing one for a lot of people to understand. It's really this temporary landing spot in our brain that holds information while we're thinking about it and working with it to understand it and make connections. So it's really this limited capacity system that involves both our short-term storage and also active processing. So unlike long-term memory that stays even when we're not thinking about it, working memory is a very temporary thing, and it's crucial for things like planning, decision-making, directing attention. Next slide. So where you're going to see, again, emerging functionally some challenges with working memory are difficulty completing mental problem solving, difficulty remembering multi-step instructions and carrying them out. I know as a parent myself, this is when you're doing that repetition, saying it over and over again, not fully finishing tasks, and then socially struggling to remember what might have been said in a conversation, and then that ability to elaborate on it or maybe ask on topic questions. And then also another key piece that can emerge when there's deficits in working memory are things like disorganization. Next slide. So the third one is inhibitory control. And this is our ability to manage emotions, or excuse me, manage automatic responses such as behaviors, emotions, and thoughts in order to act on them appropriately or achieve a goal. So really what this is our ability to control and stay on task, to resist distractions while we're trying to execute some type of plan. And it involves the ability to suppress an instinct or an inclination, allowing us to make thoughtful decision making or to be able to resist distractions. And this is really helpful when we're trying to do something in a planned manner. Next slide. So some of the common signs you might see when there's deficits in inhibitory control is like trouble maintaining attention, being easily distracted, maybe reacting in a way that is out of proportion to the size of a problem. So a small thing occurs, but having a really big emotional or behavioral response. And then the other three common ones we see are impulsivity, difficulty waiting turn, and interrupting. Next slide. And then the last one I'm going to talk about is cognitive flexibility. And broadly, this is the ability to adjust or switch our way of thinking or adapt to a new task, perspective, or environment. But I think it's more helpful when we're talking about cognitive flexibility to understand it in three pieces. So there's adaptability, and this is our ability to adjust our thinking and behavior in response to maybe a changing situation or even like an unexpected setback. And then the second piece of it is set shifting. So being able to seamlessly change our attention or our approach from one task or concept to another. And then also perspective taking. So Elise talked about this at the beginning, the capacity to view situations from multiple viewpoints. And why is that important? Because it allows us to have a more nuanced understanding of things. Next slide, please. So some of the common signs when someone has weaknesses in cognitive flexibility might be difficulty adapting to changes in routines or plans, some weaknesses with problem solving, weaknesses adjusting an approach that might not be working. So again, this is really in problem solving. Challenges with switching communication style or behavior in new context. So for instance, being outside and loud with friends and then being able to change behavior once walking into a library. And then just generally difficulty with transitions is quite common when there's challenges with cognitive flexibility. So I know people are probably most interested in strategies. So I'm going to talk quickly about this next slide, but it is important to think about the relationship between stress and executive functioning, because if the strategies we present are going to be effective, this consideration has to be made because stress, it typically impairs executive functioning. And it's going to make things like more errors occur, slower to complete tasks, difficulty planning, focusing, shifting between tasks. And so if you want strategies to be effective, you have to consider stress and being able to reduce stress before you attempt some of these strategies. So for instance, in a chaotic environment, like whether it be the house or the classroom or on a job site, it's going to be really hard for someone to follow instructions. So maybe the first thing we need to do is move them to the side or get out of that environment because they have to be in a specific place to be receptive to this information. So I'm going to move on because I want to leave enough time for the strategies, but I just want to plant the seed of really thinking about this connection because stress is going to further impair even people with well-developed executive functioning and ability to employ some of these skills that we're going to talk about next.
Excellent. So to piggyback on where Rachel just left off, as we're getting into strategies, maybe you want to play along at home if you need a little bit of a movement break. But if you want to take your thumb and wrap it in, wrap your fingers on top, and then take your other hand. You saw me do this in the beginning of today when I was talking about the relationship between stress and executive functioning. And I'm going to come back to it now because I think it can help live in the brain so that if you are a parent or a caregiver or an individual on the call, when you're experiencing stress and trying to use your executive functions, you might remember this moment and give yourself a little grace, or as Rachel said, prioritize regulation. So, one way to think about what happens when we're stressed or when we experience the fight or flight response in executive functioning, we said executive functioning happens up here. When we experience stress, we blow our lid. So the presence of the fight or flight response it wouldn't be scientifically accurate to say it takes our executive functions offline, but it would be fair to say it exacerbates existing vulnerabilities. So some strategies you're not going to hear Rachel and I talk about are to say things like, remember, don't forget to. One takeaway from tonight could be when you observe or you yourself are experiencing dysregulation, things like remembering or trying not to forget things, I don't know if that's scientifically the best toolbox we have available. So the first thing I'm going to talk about are transitions. Transitions, it might be helpful to think about breaking them down into three parts. Because you, as an individual, or you thinking about a loved one, you could look at these three parts and identify which one might be harder or easier for your individual. So the first phase of a transition is, how do I end what I'm currently doing? When I do observations, and Rachel and I have joined on this, when I do observations or when I'm working with an individual or a family and I'm watching a transition, step one is usually where things start to get spicy. Because, again, the train left the station. An individual has established a plan. And so, how do I end this plan? Is it a pause or a hard stop? How do I use my working memory to think about when I can come back to this or how to problem solve it? Or I'm anxious, I'm going to forget where I left off. So, one recommendation is just to make sure that an individual gets support in that closeout or pause phase. This means more transition warnings, and it means spending a moment on step one of a transition before then turning the Titanic into what's happening next. Once we have helped someone pause or close out, then we can actually encourage them to think ahead. So, given what Rachel said about working memory, you could imagine that if we give all three steps of a transition at once, something's falling off the conveyor belt. So, think mindfully about how to walk through each of these. Another key takeaway for transitions are to give that extra processing speed in silence. So, one of the only things that helps information get through that filter of processing speed is not putting more information into it. So, moments of silence to let the data flow through. And then we can transition to the great part of transitions, which is expectations and preview. And we often get asked about time management. Now, if we were doing this in person, sometimes there's a game we like to play where we ask everybody in the room, put your head down and raise your hand when 60 seconds have passed. We won't do this now, but as a spoiler alert, we're really bad at time. My record is that someone once put their hand up at 15 seconds. So, thinking about how often we're using time to guide our behavior or help instruct someone else's, we're actually not that good at it. So, what we would encourage you to do is you have to make the abstract concrete. Time absolutely has meaning. It is incredibly relevant and needs to be a skill we can build. And it needs to be done with visual, concrete support. So, say asking someone to come back in 1 minute without setting a 1 minute timer has a very low probability of working, and also a high probability of then leading someone to be disappointed or upset or aggravated or frustrated, stressed, or confused. So on the screen here, you see some examples of visual timers. We would encourage you to think about you as an individual or an individual you're supporting. Which timer is best matched to the request or the need to manage time? It might be a sand timer where you can see part to whole. It might be a time timer because just watching the red disappear is how you conceptualize how much time you have left. One quick tip I want to give, the image of an analog clock up here. Glass-faced clocks you can write on with a whiteboard marker. So one recommendation, for example, for a morning routine might be to color in 8 to 8:05 in yellow, because that's our yawning time, 8:05 to 8:15 in green, because that's breakfast, and 8:15 to 8:30 in purple, because that's get dressed time. That's a nice scaffolding technique so that an individual can see their relationship to time, and it doesn't mean you're prompting in kind of a more minute-to-minute basis. Some other things to think about based on where you or your individual are in building independence with time management. Teach and discuss time explicitly. Again, use visual timers with intention. Consider working on predicted versus actual time. So this is a big technique we use in schools. Maybe ask someone, how long do you predict this might take. Now, for many individuals, the prediction can be quite off. And that's a great thing to learn and explore together through data because that can actually really support anxiety management. And the last recommendation here is to think about, quote, time robbers. Time robbers are a secret villain that steal our time. Sometimes they're distractibility, sometimes they're technology, sometimes they're the beautiful things that are going on outside our window. But using the phrase time robbers to problem solve when this isn't working is a depersonalized version of feedback that can help us have a less defensive conversation. So, for example, if we were to talk about a morning routine, and I could say, well, Rachel, you've been late every day because you're getting distracted. There's that you again. I don't know about all of you, but you doesn't work very well for a lot in my family or a lot of families. If I were to say, Rachel, there are some time robbers in our morning routine, do you see how that shifts the conversation to one of collaboration and joining? Rachel.
So the next strategy is breaking it down. Now, one way of breaking things down is by doing something called a task analysis. So you might see in educational recommendations things like breaking things into smaller, more manageable pieces. A task analysis is similar to that. So I'm just going to give you an example. You want to teach your child how to do laundry, and you said to them, it's simple. You just like grab the laundry, you bring it downstairs, you put it in the washing machine, detergent, go, and they're not having success at it and you're frustrated. You do it all the time. It's so automatic. Well, if you think about it, doing a load of laundry, if you actually break it down into the small steps, it's so much more than that. So it's first finding the laundry basket, taking the laundry out of the hamper, putting it in the laundry basket, bringing it downstairs, potentially sorting it between light or dark, locating the detergent, measuring out the detergent, putting the detergent and the laundry in, setting the right setting, closing the lid, pressing start. We're at least 10 steps right there. Right? So that could be why you're having these challenges. And you're like, I'm repeating myself over and over again. I'm showing it, but it's not working. So often doing something like a task analysis, stepping back and identifying what needs to happen for this task to be successful from start to finish, and then teach your individual or even yourself one, maybe two steps to start. Once those steps are mastered and done with independence, add on a third one and teach that step. And then make sure one, two, and now three can all be done with fidelity before you add on step four. And depending on your child, you might be able to add two steps at a time. You might only be able to add one, but I will tell you, it's more work at the beginning, but the payoff is going to be incredible because you're going to make sure that skill is mastered and done with independence. You also want to provide, especially as the task gets bigger, a lot of positive reinforcement. Now, I just gave the example of laundry, but this task analysis can be done for so many different things. So it could be laundry, it could be taking out the trash, it could be brushing teeth, tying shoes. It can be applied to so many different things, but especially when there is a deficit in working memory, you want to think about how can I break something down and how can I present it so that it's not overwhelming and we're able to take in, digest, and learn that information. Next slide. So the next one is building routines. And I imagine you all have heard this a lot. And it's like, okay, yeah, routines, good, structure, good. So I want to focus on parts of this because I think sometimes why routines don't work is due to a few little things. So I'm going to give you some tips because I imagine everyone here knows what a routine is. Routines can be for the week, it can be for a day. But here's some of the things that can make sure your routines are actually successful. So the first is actually jumping down to step three, the teach and practice part. I think of a routine as a completely new skill. So it's a new skill that you're introducing. And so in order for us to learn a new skill, it has to be taught and it has to be practiced. So sometimes we'll create this new routine. We're so excited. We present it to the family. We try it for 2 days. It fails. We give up on it. Often that's because we didn't spend enough time teaching, practicing. It's often hard before it gets easier because you're changing from something you are already doing to something new. And then the other piece that I talk a lot about in my neuropsych feedbacks is around the order of events. So now jumping back up to step one, how we build our routines. So for instance, after school, this is a hard time for a lot of families. Kid gets home, they get on devices, they don't want to get off devices, homework is a battle. So here's something to think about. Order of events. When we build this routine, let's be really thoughtful about trying as much as possible to put non-preferred tasks or less preferred tasks before preferred tasks. So for instance, decompression time after school, most kids need it, right? Let's first come home, maybe have a snack, put on some comfy clothes, then do homework, and then switch to leisure time activities. So we're just switching that screen time, that leisure time activity to come after, so that transition becomes easier. Another one is bedtime, where I see a lot of challenges. And what I encourage parents to do, again, is brushing teeth something your child hates? Why don't you do dinner, immediately go to brushing teeth, washing face, putting on pajamas, and then we do leisure time activities. So again, you're minimizing those tough transitions by the order in which you're creating routines. So hopefully that's a little bit helpful, because I know everyone's like routine, 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 we get it. But really thinking about what are your orders of events and taking that time to practice. All right, next one is around utilizing things like checklists and visual guides. I love these because these are often low demand to create, but have a great impact. And I tried to put a lot of different examples up here, so this could be applicable for anyone depending on whatever age, developmental level that they are. There's so many different options. Now, why checklists and visual guides are so helpful is because they provide a reference point and anchor to go back to. It also provides a place for progress monitoring and a visual support. Now, with some of these, you're going to want to really think about making sure it's matched to your individual. So for example, language level. Also, if your individual doesn't have a sense of time, don't put time on there. It's just going to make it more confusing. If they don't have a sense of number, don't put numbers. These can be really tailored to whatever is going to work. And then the other piece of this too is if you have a tech savvy or a tech interested individual in your home, there are so many incredible apps now that you can use to create these types of things. So on the screen, I have one a screenshot from an app. It's called My Homework Planner, I think. It's a fantastic one. And you can have like schedules of classes or homework assignments. So these are really easily adaptable. And then the last tip for this one is, if possible, using real pictures over clip art could be so helpful. And here I don't have a good example of that, but if you're trying to create one of these and you want to do like pictures of toothbrush, toothpaste, actually taking ones of what your individual is using is going to be really helpful, because it just makes it more meaningful. And I hand it back over to Elise.
Excellent. Thank you. I do want to say we're getting some great questions in the chat, so we're compiling those and we will roll into those for the Q&A. So an extension of the visuals that Rachel was describing, oftentimes the smaller sub-steps within a larger chore are where we get tripped up. And a lot of visuals will often require us, will support us to manage each of those individual steps. Another approach to visuals, once you feel like an individual has a good sense of the general steps within a routine, is to zoom out and give that individual kind of a lesser prompt to help them meet the expectation and complete the task. So let's take a look at the example here of a bedroom. This was used in a situation where cleaning your room was just a battle every time. And not only was it a battle, but then we were losing out on some of the hygiene needs and the functional ideas of where do your clothes go so you can find them, how to retrieve certain items, and living in an organized space. This situation was preparing an individual to have a roommate. So that's a very real timeline to build some of these skills. So in this situation, what we did is the parent and the adolescent, we went in and we cleaned the room. We both looked at it and we said, this is a clean room, right? Great, we're in agreement. We took a picture of it and then printed that picture of the room and put it on the wall. So the next time it's, as Rachel said, we've practiced this routine. We know that it's every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 p.m. and you don't get TV time until your room is clean. Then the individual would go in and clean their room. And when the parent came in to check, Instead of the parent being the decider of whether the room was clean or not, they pull the picture off the wall to see if the pictures match. So there's two positive goals here. One of which is the adolescent could use that visual. The adolescent can use the visual to match, did they complete their own expectation of a clean room? Another version of this we have is for individuals who have shared workspaces in work. Take a picture of your workspace and at the end of the day, have your workspace match the picture. So, again, one use of this tool is as a self-management support. But then the other is when you do have a parent or a caregiver that is providing prompting or support, again, you're joining by using this visual. You're both looking at the visual and identifying, does this or does this not meet our shared criteria? Some individualized examples of using what we call this Gestalt image approach is, as you see here, a picture of someone ready for bed. So with the visuals Rachel's already showed, did you brush your teeth? Do you have all those steps mapped out? Great. Now a final check would be, let's look at this picture of you ready for bed, or let's go look at you in the mirror. Do you look ready for bed? You could imagine a good use of this would be getting ready for school. Have a picture of your child holding everything they need to get ready to school, everything you need for your college classes, everything you need for your work day. And when you leave in the morning, you're cross-referencing with that image to say, do I look ready for my day? Perhaps on the back, you might have a checklist or other individualized tool to give you more detail and support. One more example of an executive functioning tool. This connects a little bit to memory and a little bit to emotional regulation. Many times, when we're asking an answer that we know the answer to, we're asking a question that we know the answer to. Sometimes it's because we're anxious. Sometimes it's because we forgot the answer. So it can be really hard when you, as a caregiver, are being asked a question and you don't know if it's a challenging question, you don't know if it's an information-seeking question. So that moment can be quite a confusing one for everyone involved. One recommendation we might encourage you to think about is for recurring questions, consider writing an answer guide matched to your individual's developmental level, an answer to a commonly recurring question. Rachel already mentioned, why can't I watch TV before school? Why can't I watch TV when I get home from school? Why do I have to give my iPhone to you before I go to bed at night? If we continue to answer that question and engage in that dialogue, we're probably changing the answer slightly every time, even if we sound very consistent. So one way to help this inhibitory control for an individual saying, I know the answer to that, and having that moment is to craft a script of what the consistent answer would be. This might be a series of these that live on the fridge. And so when an individual asks this question, you can direct them to the fridge. Or you can actually use this for yourself. Why I have to be at work at 8 a.m. Why I can't have ice cream for lunch 5 days a week. Sometimes it just helps to have these rote responses ready and available to you. It can be a soothing mechanism. It can aid working memory. It can be regulatory. It can support inhibitory control. So it really touches on a lot of the problem-solving pieces that Rachel has mentioned are a part of executive functioning. Well, with that, we are really pleased to transition into the Q&A. I do just want to touch on some of the recommendations and resources Rachel and I have listed on this slide. First, of course, apps and digital tools are a tremendous resource these days. One thing we might just share when you are doing something digitally, it is you can sometimes internalize things a little bit better and more richly when you're doing it with pen and paper. So feel free to be strategic. You might be, or you might be caring for someone who really needs to color it out, and then you could transition it to a digital tool. So there might be a little bit of balance in using both of these. Attitude Magazine was originated as a resource guide for the profile of ADHD and ADD, and so much of their content is very strong in executive functioning, as is understood.org. We've also linked to a couple of articles. A Guide for Executive Functioning is out of Harvard University. And the last link here for workplace digital supports is geared towards neurodivergent adults in the workforce. So tools that either your company might already have or that you could implement that are designed specifically for workplace expectations. Excellent. Well, Rachel, we have our first question that was asked earlier, so I'll throw it over to you for this one. The question was, what do you do? This was in reference to time management. What do you do when you have an individual who's quite triggered or dysregulated by the idea of being timed? What do you think?
Don't do it. So that's why we present so many different strategies, because if that's going to increase anxiety, that's going to increase stress, and that's further going to exacerbate that executive functioning challenge. So you might think of something else. For instance, Elise's example of using the clock and writing it on there, it's not timing, it's just giving them anchor points of when things are going to be done. So I would recommend, if that's going to be stressful, don't use it, especially something that's in front of them and is counting down the time. That's going to do the opposite of what we want. There's still ways to provide time warnings, and you can even, I think the back and forth conversation, it can be really helpful, is what feels good for you? What could I say to help you? And then also sometimes the way that you frame a timer or time warnings can be helpful too. Often what happens is when we give a warning, our individual thinks that, okay, I have to cram absolutely everything I can into those last 5 minutes that they have. And that, again, just leads to more stress versus saying, okay, we've got 5 minutes left. Let's think about how can we wrap up your game right now so that you finish at a point that you feel comfortable when that timer goes off. And maybe they're actually able to get through that level in 3 minutes and they stop there rather than trying to start one with only 2 minutes left. So I would say that's why we try to give all these strategies and make you have, like, help you really fill up your toolbox, because not every strategy is going to work for everyone. At least you might have other ideas, but I would say don't use it if it's not helpful.
Yeah. Absolutely. Similar to, I think there was a response in the chat about one of the images from earlier. I think you all knowing who you are and your loved ones best, anything that would be potentially triggering starts that stress response, which then will undermine any of your best efforts. I think one thing I would say is I'm constantly humbled by how long it takes to practice a skill. So, for example, like getting ready and out the door in the morning, your aim might be 15 minutes, but you right now might be at the 40-minute mark. So being mindfully and kind of back chaining into your schedule to try to remove as many opportunities where time becomes that triggering variable. We have a question, is tutoring an option as an additional sport for executive functioning? And if so, how do we find a right person? Yes. So as you saw on the last slide, we did list one-to-one executive functioning coaching. Now, this is widely variable because it's not kind of a standardized service. So I think there are lots of ways, you could do Google search. I would also suggest, if you're in a school district or post-secondary education or the workplace, check in with either the CPAC or special ed liaisons or student accessibility office, or if you're in the workplace, your employee benefits or employee assistance programs, because often they will have vetted executive functioning coach programs. A couple of questions I might encourage you to ask are you using a manualized program? So that might mean the coach is kind of working through this step, then this step, then this step. And for some situations, like I really want my kid to learn to manage a syllabus, manualized might actually be the way to go. If you're looking for that, help me keep these guardrails on, then you're looking for someone that will individualize their weekly feedback. I think the other question to ask is, what's your average frequency with clients? So this will tell you, is this someone who can meet with you weekly, or is this someone that really does monthly check-ins? And I would think the last question I would throw out there would be, how do you frame skill building as well as in the moment support. So you are going to want to look for someone that gives a good answer that kind of checks your gut on that, someone that is thinking about improving independence rather than just kind of being the band-aid and keeping the bumpers on. Rachel, anything you would add to that?
No, I think you covered everything there. Yeah.
Great.
I saw a question about shame with using some of these strategies. And if
Yeah.
you have a picture and you show it to your child and their room doesn't look like that picture, is that going to cause shame? And I really do think it all depends really on how you present it. So if you hold the picture and put it up next to the room and say, hey, I see this is out of place, this is out of place, this is out of place, then it might make them feel bad. But framing it as this is a really helpful tool so that I don't have to nag you or come back, look at it, check at it, see if it looks right, use this as a reference, that can change how they view it. So we want it to be a helpful tool, not something that could be punitive for you to pick out everything they did wrong, but let's match it up. This should help you so you don't need me to keep coming in, or I don't have to keep telling you what you did wrong. You use this, and when it feels good and it looks about the same, you come tell me. And then you provide a lot of positive reinforcement. And if things aren't right, it's again doing some of that questioning together. I noticed some things are maybe still on the floor there. And then maybe problem solving around, like maybe they didn't know where to put them. Right. So I
Mhm.
think it's all about framing with using some of these tools because we don't want tools to be punitive. I see this
Right.
often with something like deep breathing when we suggest it as a tool. So many people hate it because it has been overused. It has been used as a punitive thing. So when we use tools, we really want to try to put them in a light of this is empowering and this is going
Right.
to be helpful for you. This is now not something that's going to get you in trouble.
And I think, Rachel, that's where creating that original visual with your individual starts the process in a much more collaborative place. Okay, do you want to take the picture? Should I take it? What picture? If the individual doesn't like that picture, don't use that picture. So I think just from the point of creating the visual really sets the tone for how is this tool for you as a parent, or is this tool really for the individual and your collaboration? We had a question about the morning routine. Well, first, let's just all have a collective sigh about the morning routine, right? Whew. Oh, we could have a whole 2 hour therapy group, Rachel, about morning routines.
Yes, so tough.
So this individual is sharing that, in order to get out, I'm paraphrasing, but in order to really get out the door, we've kind of let things go. We've let this go, and we're on the bare minimum track. Is that a problem? So, Rachel, feel free to get started.
I would say no. I think that mornings are really hard and you just often have to do what you can do to get out the door. I would say, though, take what you have and similar to sort of the task analysis, master that. And once you feel comfortable with that, then you might slowly think about adding more things in. So sometimes if you have to really take things down to survive and get out the door, that's okay. And then as that becomes routine and that becomes easier, then you might start thinking about, can I add a few more things back in? Or potentially, is there anything we could do the night before to prepare for that morning? So, laying out clothes ahead of time, packing bag ahead of time, doing some of it by really kind of front loading it in the evening so it doesn't even become an issue. So, the demands are still there, the things still get done. But again, you're reordering the events so that, again, mornings are not so stressful because believe me, for all of us, they are.
Ugh, I had a concrete example of this, Rachel, recently where we were talking about the clothes don't get in the hamper. And that in itself wasn't the problem, but then we don't know what's clean and what's dirty. So then the individual didn't feel independent figuring out what. So instead, what we did is we moved the laundry basket into the kitchen. Now, this sounds weird, right? But the laundry basket in the kitchen meant that it was very clear. I get this individual wanted to get dressed in the kitchen watching TV in the morning and they went in the laundry. So be creative with environmental modifications. And I totally agree. There's no such thing as bare minimum if you get out the door when you need to.
And Elise is just to that point too. I was just thinking about something I discussed with a family recently of forgetting to put on like deodorant. And so what we did is we put it in the drawer with shirts. So like it had to go on at the same time as the shirt. And that's a silly place to put it. It should be in the bathroom, but that just wasn't working for this family. So sometimes you are creative rethinking in order for these things to get done.
So the next question is about the transition off of screens, specifically into bedtime. You saw Rachel and my facial expression. So my initial recommendation will be we actually have a webinar on this coming up. So on the first Monday in October, from 12 to 1, we have a healthy screen habits for individuals on the autism spectrum. So my first recommendation would be consider checking that out. Um, you know, I don't know that there's much we could say right now that's going to be kind of really get this in place and it's going to help because we're only learning more and more about the addictive nature of screens. A couple of years ago, we were kind of reserving that word when it came to screens. We weren't as comfortable using it. And now, Rachel, feel free to disagree. Now, I think many of us are feeling much more comfortable describing screen use as addictive. There won't be much we could talk about except I think thinking about your routine and when it happens. You might need to have kind of more controllable on and off features of Wi-Fi. There are some transition techniques like having a step down activity. So if it's screens to bed, that's a landslide. It might be screens to your favorite card game with a caregiver to bed. But again, because of design, screens are designed to be dynamic and keep you logged in. We're fighting an uphill battle. Rachel, anything you would add to that?
No, I think all of that is I agree with. And even in a step down, I have seen some families do like Roblox to TV. And you're
Right,
like, it's still a screen, but sometimes that is a step down in itself
right.
because TV can be less addicting than Roblox is. So we're going Roblox to TV, then maybe to bedtime routine. Don't beat yourself up if that becomes the process. Whatever is going to help step down, sometimes just that transition piece can make a big difference.
Yes. Rachel, I'll send the next question to you. Can processing speed actually be improved over time? And if so, what do you do to improve it?
Yeah. So often not. Sometimes our brain is just wired the way it is. And so what we think about is not necessarily trying to improve the skill, but learn tools to manage that. So just an example of myself, my working memory is not my strength. There's very little I can do to improve my working memory. And there are programs you can find out there. There's one called CogMed. They have different programs, but the research behind them is not incredibly strong. So instead of thinking about what are the tools we can do to support that area of weakness. So for me, if you saw my office, there's lists everywhere. Actually, I try to hide them, but there's lists everywhere because that's the tool I have learned for my working memory to support that. And so for processing speed, often it's learning tools. And sometimes that's learning scripts. So for instance, learning to be able to say, can you repeat that? Or can you give me a minute to think about that? Because what I see often happens with people with deficits in processing speed is they will say things like, I don't know. And it's not actually a reflection of what they know, but they know that someone is expecting a response. Maybe they're waiting for someone just to interject because they've learned that that will happen or repeat the instruction. So there's different tools that we can do to try to support processing speed when the skill itself is hard to improve. That's likely just the way the brain is wired. So you really want to think about what are some tools to support the slow processing speed.
There are so many fantastic questions in the chat, so I'll apologize in advance that we may not get to all of them. Let's look at kind of the theme. Rachel, we have a theme here about dysregulation, so specifically in response to unpredictable schedule changes.
Mm.
Um, and I'll look at the question more specifically, but how would you respond or de-escalate when there's a sudden change that results in that emotional explosion?
Yeah, so often when there's that emotional explosion, the more language you provide, the harder it's going to be. So when there is initially that explosion, often it's about just getting through that. Because as we talked about stress, again, it's going to make it hard to receive any sort of information. So my typical recommendation in that moment is get through it whatever way you can, and then problem solve from there.
Yeah.
So that might be, simplifying some first then language. So I know this is hard. First, we're going to do this, then we're going to do this. Often, if this is a common theme, supports to have around you or having like a sensory coping bag where you've got tools in it that you can take on the go. So if those instances come up, you've got some of those coping skills tools. But in that moment, the more you try to talk at them, the harder it's going to be. So getting through that initial burst of emotion in whatever way, because it's so different for everyone. So I can't give you a specific recommendation of something that you can do. Like I said, some people love deep breathing, some people hate it. You're just going to need to know your individual, get through that moment. And once they're at a level that they're calmer, you can start to try to maybe explain why that happened or what's going to happen next or when they might expect it to happen again, especially if it was something that they were looking forward to. Elise, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, two things I would add, just to kind of give another way to say what you're saying with the reduced language, that there may not be a problem to solve, right? So I think often when an individual is dysregulated, we think that if we helped them solve the problem, they wouldn't be dysregulated. They already, like the ship, sail, cattle, barn, like whatever expression you want to use. So I think in that moment, you might have a reaction. If I solve this, we won't be uncomfortable. And I think one thing to think about is I don't know that that's realistic in that moment. I think that's a caregiving impulse. So that moment may just need space and empathy. It might just be schedule change. And then again, processing speed, that awkward wait where you're literally counting in your head or making tonight's grocery list or saying all the things that you loved about last night's episode of something, that might need to be 10, 15 seconds. So that distinction Rachel's talking about of deal with the emotions, what dealing might look like is a face that looks like this. And then, of course, if that's not your child and they really need active re-regulation, then it might be pulling in sensory things. But try to resist the urge to solve the problem, thinking it will put, again, the cow back in the barn or however that goes.
I
Um,
want to say I've seen a lot of people ask about this being recorded. It will be, and it will all be posted on the website, and you will get the slides. So I see Anne trying to answer different people saying that, but just as a reminder, this will be recorded if you want to go back to it.
I think we have time for two more quick answers, Rachel. One is how do you know to decide how to organize that task analysis, frontward or backward? And it's a great question. The answer is there's no wrong way to do it. And thinking about Rachel, had said earlier the value of empowerment and doing kind of the either the challenging thing first or actually the competent, confident thing first. So, for example, if you're doing kind of taking the trash out, you might start with the barrels coming back in and work backwards. And maybe your child's job is to start with bringing the barrels back into the house. That's still working towards the sequence of the whole thing. Um, and then I think often how we see it done is we start at the first couple of steps of the task. So, what are the first things that are within striking distance? One thing that can be hard if we're talking about younger kids is they can't reach the washing machine. And I don't know about you, but I don't want them opening the detergent. So, there are some things that make a lot of these steps inaccessible. One thing I might encourage you to think about is the value of modeling. So, there's a framework that we talk about, which is I do, we do, you do. Often things like laundry or grocery shopping are invisible. They just they just happen. Trying to jump to your child doesn't know how laundry gets done in your house to having them do it themselves is going to be really tricky because they're just going to want the fairies to come back. So think about a precursor, again, at any age of your child, any age and stage, is to do that together. Hey, Rachel, it's Tuesday. This is when I do laundry. Walk with me as I go down into the basement. And then you stay together. So there's really good modeling and kind of schema building there. Rachel, anything you would add?
No,
Okay.
that's great there.
Oh, let's look for that last question. I'm scrolling. I'm scrolling.
I see the one about I don't know frequently. If your
Great.
child is responding, I don't know frequently, and you know that they know it, often I say explicitly, like, take another minute to think about it and really pause and don't jump in too fast. Don't repeat yourself too often because That I don't know is a coping mechanism. It is a learned response. I've been asked a question. I know someone's expecting a response. I can't get there fast enough. I'm just going to say, I don't know. And often they don't even realize they're doing it. It becomes so automatic. So I really encourage you to create pauses and to provide that prompt of, hey, just think about it. Take another minute. Or even I'll come back around and ask you again, right? That's something we'll encourage teachers to do in the classroom is not putting kids often who have processing speed deficits on the spot, but saying, hey, here's the question, let me come back around to you. You can do the same thing at home too if you're getting these I don't know questions. Also, sometimes if it's like a question about the day and you're saying, how's your day? And I don't know, try asking a little bit more of a specific question that can also help kids too, because it gives them, again, like an anchor point, something to work off of.
And one extension I think I would offer for that, Rachel, is cards. So it's not possible for you to always have the index cards ready. But if you have the I don't know child and you're noticing there are certain circumstances where it's the I don't know might represent one of five phrases. Maybe it's I'm upset, I'm confused, I don't want to do this, or other functional language. Sometimes having those ready to go if they live on the kitchen counter or your child puts them in their iPhone. So thinking about the next best step might not be verbal engagement. It might be that they type it out or they point to the card, or this is a recommendation, as Rachel said, that we use a lot in schools, right? That the teacher might have five cards that are common school phrases. I need a break, etc. So when that storm is happening up here or we're waiting, visual pointing or referencing or typing might actually be kind of the next accessible point. Well, we made it to 7:29. There were so many fantastic questions. Thank you for all of you for joining us tonight. And again, you will get the slides and a recording will be available on the website within 3 weeks. Thank you for
Thank
joining
you.
us. Take care.